I polished the walnut table myself that morning, not because anyone asked me to, not because I thought she'd notice. I did it because my wife used to do it every Sunday for 41 years, and 3 years after I buried her, I still couldn't sit down to a meal at that table without running a soft cloth over the wood first. It was the closest thing I had to praying. The dining room of my house sits at the back, looking out over the back porch and the long slope of grass that runs down to the lake. I'd lived in that house in upstate Vermont for 36 years. My wife and I bought it the summer our son was born, when the floors still creaked and the kitchen still had that yellow linoleum she hated. We tore the linoleum out together one weekend and laid down oak planks. She stained them herself. You could still see her thumbprint near the doorway if you knew where to look. I knew where to look. That afternoon, I'd set the table for 5, my son, his fiancée, her mother and father, and me. I'd cooked a pot roast the way my wife used to make it, with the carrots cut on the diagonal and the onions caramelized slow on the stove. I'd opened a bottle of wine that had been in the cellar since 2009, which was the year my son graduated high school, and we'd bought a case to celebrate. There were 4 bottles left. I figured tonight was as good a night as any. My son had called me 3 weeks earlier to tell me he was getting married. He'd been dating the girl for 9 months. He sounded happy on the phone, the way he used to sound when he was 12 and he'd caught his first base off the dock. I didn't ask too many questions. I figured I'd meet her and form my own opinions, the way my own father had done with my wife 43 years ago. He'd taken her hand at our first dinner and told her she had the eyes of a woman who could outwork a man, and he meant it as the highest compliment he knew how to give. She laughed for an hour about it on the drive home. I was hoping for something like that. What I got was different. She walked in ahead of my son. Tall, blonde, expensive. The kind of expensive that announces itself in a wristwatch and the way a coat is folded over an arm. She looked at me, and I watched her face do something I've seen 1,000 times in my life and learned to read like weather. The slight pull at the corner of her mouth. The brief, involuntary inventory of my hands, my shoes, the lines on my face. She was pricing me. Right there in my own foyer. "You must be the dad," she said. I told her I was. I told her my name. I held out my hand. She looked at my hand for a moment, at the burn scar that runs from my knuckles up under the cuff of my shirt, at the place where the skin grew back wrong 40 years ago and never quite settled into anything you'd call ordinary. And then she laughed. Not a big laugh, a short, sharp one, like a dog's bark. "Oh my God," she said, looking past me toward my son. "At least we know what we're doing for Halloween. He doesn't even need a mask." My son said her name. Shark. He said it the way a man says a name when he's hoping the next thing out of her mouth will fix the last thing. She turned back to me with a smile that was supposed to be charming. Sorry. I'm a comedian when I'm nervous. It's a thing." She shook my hand quickly, the way you shake the hand of someone whose germs you suspect. "It's so nice to meet you. My parents are pulling up now. They got stuck behind a tractor on the way in. God, the country, right?" I told her welcome, and that supper was almost ready, and that I'd take her coat. She handed it to me without looking. I hung it in the closet. I noticed my hands were steady. I'd been worried they wouldn't be. My son hung back as she went into the living room. He put a hand on my shoulder. "Dad, I'm so sorry. She's nervous. She didn't mean—" "It's fine," I said. "It isn't fine. I'll talk to her." "Don't. Not tonight. Let's get through dinner." He nodded. His eyes were wet for a second, and then they weren't. And then he went after her into the living room. I stood there for a long minute alone in the foyer, looking at the closet door and her coat hanging there, and I let myself feel exactly one thing, which was that my wife would have laughed. My wife would have walked into that living room and said something so dry and so kind it would have taken the girl 10 years to understand she'd been put in her place. I didn't have that gift. I had a different one. I went to the kitchen and stirred the gravy. Her parents arrived 10 minutes later. They came in through the front door with the kind of polite, slightly anxious energy of people who've been told their daughter is marrying up and they need to make a good impression. The mother was small and sharp-featured. The father was tall and gray, with the tired posture of a man who'd worked outdoors most of his life and was now expected to wear a sport coat indoors. They were good people. I could tell it in the first 5 seconds. There was something familiar about them too, but I couldn't place it, and I figured it would come to me later. I shook the father's hand. I introduced myself. I led them into the dining room. That was when the strange thing happened. The mother stopped in the doorway. She looked at me. She looked at my hand on the back of the chair I was holding out for her. Her eyes went up to my face, slow, like she was reading something written in small print. Her mouth opened a little. She closed it. She sat down. The father didn't notice. He was looking at the lake out the window, telling me what a beautiful piece of property I had, asking how long I'd lived here. I told him 36 years. He whistled and said his wife and he had been in their house for 31, and he hoped to God they'd never have to leave it. The mother beside him said nothing. She kept watching me. Once, when I bent down to set the gravy boat on the table, she made a small sound, like she'd been about to speak and changed her mind. We sat down to eat. I said grace, the short one my own father used to say, to fiancée. I'll just call her my son's fiancée, because I find I don't have it in me to use her name even now. Picked at her pot roast like it might bite her. Her mother ate carefully and watched me. Her father ate with the appetite of a man who'd been working since dawn. The trouble started before the second course. So, my son's fiancée said, setting her fork down, we wanted to talk to you tonight about a few things. About the wedding. And about, well, I guess, the future. All right, my parents and I have been talking, and we've kind of been thinking it just makes sense, right, for everyone to chip in to what we're calling, like, the launch. The wedding, plus everything after. The launch, I repeated. Yeah, like, the wedding's around $240,000. We're doing it at this venue out near the coast. It's gorgeous. You'll love it. And then we're putting a down payment on a place in the city, because obviously his commute is killing him. Between the two, we're looking at a lot. And my parents are putting in 100, so we were thinking, you'd match it. Or do a little more, since you've only got the one kid. I looked at her parents. The father had gone very still over his plate. The mother had her napkin twisted in her hands under the edge of the table. I looked at my son. He was staring at the centerpiece. He wasn't going to help me. Honey, I said, you and I have known each other 26 minutes. I don't think we're at the place yet where we discuss bank accounts. She laughed that bark of a laugh again. Oh my God, sorry, was that abrupt? It's just we've got a timeline and his commute, and it's all right. It's all right, I said. I'm a direct man. I appreciate direct. I'll be direct. I'll be direct. Back. I'm not paying for a $240,000 wedding. My son looked up. Dad. I'll help with the wedding, I said. I'd be honored to. But I'll help with a wedding I can afford, and a wedding that makes sense. I won't put my house up for it. I won't refinance for it, and I won't be told what number to write on a check by a girl I just met. The fiancé's face changed. It went through 3 weathers in about 2 seconds. Surprise. Then something hard. Then a smile. The smile was the worst of the 3. Okay, she said. Okay, I get it. So we're doing this. She turned to my son. Babe, tell him. My son looked at her. He looked at me. He looked at his plate. Dad, we were also thinking. About the house. What about it? About the house. What about it? The house is, Dad. The house is enormous. For one person, in a lake property. You know what this place is worth right now. The market's insane. If you sold it, you could move into a condo in town, you'd be closer to me, and the equity would it would set us up. It would set you up, and it'd be good for everybody. I set my fork down. You want me to sell my house? I want you to think about it. That's all. You want me to sell the house your mother and I bought before you were born, where she stained those floors with her own hands, where I sat with her every morning of the last 6 months of her life and watched the sun come up over that lake, so you and your fiancé, who I met half an hour ago, can have a down payment in the city. My son's fiancé jumped in. Don't make it sound like that. That's not Jesus. We're not asking you to dishonor her memory. We're asking you to think about your future. You're what, 63? You don't need all this space. You're rattling around in here. It's actually kind of sad. The mother of the fiancé made a small sound across the table. A breath drawn in fast. Her husband finally seemed to notice she was upset. He put his hand on her arm. "Honey," he said, "are you all right?" She didn't answer him. She was looking at me again. Her eyes had filled, and one tear had escaped and run down her cheek and into the corner of her mouth, and she didn't lift a hand to wipe it away. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." "Mom," said the fiancé. "What's wrong with you, Mom?" The mother shook her head. "Nothing. I'm fine. I had a very clear thought just then. It came to me like a memory of something that had already happened. I thought, I know who this woman is. I've looked into this woman's face before, a long time ago, when it was much younger and full of a different kind of grief. But the thought wouldn't quite come into focus, and the table needed me, so I set it aside. I would come back to it. "Let's eat," I said. "We can finish this conversation later." Nobody ate. The pot roast went cold. My son's fiancée dabbed at her mouth with her napkin and excused herself to the bathroom. My son stared at the place where she'd been. The mother of the fiancé was looking at me again, and something in her face had decided. She stood up. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "I need a minute. I'm sorry. I need a minute alone." "The porch is just through there," I said. She nodded and went out, and the screen door tapped shut behind her. The four of us at the table sat in the kind of silence that happens after a window breaks. The fiancé's father cleared his throat. "She's not herself tonight," he said. "I'm sorry. I don't know what's gotten into her. It's all right." "I want you to know," he said, looking at his hands, "that we didn't agree to any $100,000. We didn't agree to anything. Our daughter she's gotten ahead of herself before. We've been working on it." "I'm sorry, Dad," said the fiancé, coming back in from the hallway and catching the last of it. "Don't. No, honey. I'm not going to sit here and, Dad, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that what you said to this man at the door was acceptable. Oh my God, it was a joke. It was not a joke. Mom!" The fiancé wheeled toward the porch. "Mom, can you come back in here, please? Dad's losing it." The mother of the fiancé came back through the screen door. Her face was wet. She was carrying something in her hand, a small folded thing the size of a wallet. I couldn't see what it was. She walked over to me, not to her chair, to me. She stopped a foot from where I was sitting, and she looked down at me, and her chin was trembling. "I have to ask you something," she said. "And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to ask it like this in front of everybody. But I have to ask, because if I don't ask, now I won't sleep tonight. Go ahead. Were you, a long time ago, were you a firefighter?" The dining room went very still. My son turned his head slowly. The fiancé stopped halfway into her seat. "Yes," I said. 31 years. I retired 5 years ago." She made a noise. It was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when a wall they didn't know they were holding up gives way. "Where?" she whispered. "Where did you serve?" "Most of my career was in Hartford, the last 8 years, up here in Vermont." "Why?" She put a hand to her mouth. Her shoulders shook once, hard. "There was a fire," she said. "In Hartford, 26 years ago, in a 3-story walk-up on Sigourney Street." I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. My face was already moving without my permission. She unfolded the thing in her hand. It was a photograph. Old. Creased to softness at the edges. She held it out to me with both hands, the way a person holds out something fragile. It was a picture of a little girl, maybe 5, standing on a sidewalk with a foil emergency blanket around her shoulders, her face streaked with soot, her eyes huge, and kneeling next to her, with one knee on the concrete and one hand on her shoulder, was a man in turnout gear, with his helmet off and his hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. The man was looking at the little girl with the kind of look you only ever see on a person who has just made a deal with the worst part of God and gotten what he asked for. The man was me. 26 years younger. The little girl was the woman standing in front of me. No, the little girl was the fiancée. I lifted my eyes from the photograph. The fiancée was standing across the table, looking at the photograph in her mother's hands, and her face had gone the color of old paper. The mother of the fiancé was crying openly now, her hand still over her mouth, talking through her fingers. "I have looked for you," she said. "I have looked for you for 26 years. The fire department wouldn't give me your name. I wrote letters. I went down to the station 3 times. They told me you transferred, but they wouldn't say where. I thought you didn't want to be found. I made my husband stop looking. And now you are sitting at this table, and my daughter just..." She couldn't finish. The father of the fiancée had stood up at some point. He came around the table. He stopped beside his wife. He looked at the photograph. He looked at me. He put one big hand over his face. His shoulders started shaking. "Sir," he said, through his hand. "Sir," he said through his hand. "Sir, you pulled my baby girl out of a burning building. You ran in there twice. They told us it was twice. The second time, they thought you were dead in there. You went back in for our daughter." I remembered the fire. I had not thought about it in years, by which I mean I had thought about it almost every day, and had simply gotten very good at thinking about it without noticing. There had been 6 children in that building. We got 5 of them out on the first sweep. I was the one who realized we'd missed a count, which meant a 6th one was still in there, and I went back in. My helmet shield melted on the second trip. I don't remember bringing her out. I remember being on the sidewalk with her, and a paramedic pulling her away from me, and another firefighter putting his hand on the back of my neck and asking me my name to check that I was still myself. I had not known what happened to her after they took her in the ambulance. I had asked the next day, but they said the family had transferred her to a hospital closer to where their grandparents lived. And after that, she was a name on a chart somewhere. And then she wasn't even that. The burn on my hand, the burn that ran up under my cuff, the burn that my son's fiancée had laughed at and said made me look like a Halloween mask. That burn was from the second trip. I had taken my glove off to undo a latch that had worked in the heat. I had been holding her, and I had needed one hand free. The fiancée was making a small noise, a repeating one. I looked at her. She had sat down. She was looking at the photograph her mother was now holding flat on the table. Her hand was over her mouth. Her shoulders were drawn up around her ears like she was bracing for a blow. "Mom," she said. "Mom, that's you," her mother said. "That's you the night of the fire." Mom, no. That's the man who pulled you out. Honey, look at me. Look at me. Look at me. That is the man who pulled you out of that building." The fiancée looked at me. For the first time since she'd walked into my house, she actually looked at me. At my face. Not at my hand. Not at my watch. At my face. Not at my watch. At my face. "I didn't know," she whispered. You said," her father said slowly, like he was working out a math problem. "You said to him, the moment you walked in his front door, that he didn't need a mask for Halloween. Because of his face, because of his hand. Dad, you said that to the man who carried you out of a fire." She started crying. Not the pretty kind, the kind where the whole face caves in and there's no managing it. My son was on his feet. He hadn't said a word in 5 minutes. He was looking back and forth between his fiancée and me in the photograph, and his face was doing something I'd never seen on him before, which was the slow, dawning understanding of a grown man recognizing exactly what kind of woman he'd asked to marry him. "I think," he said very quietly, "we should all take a few minutes." "No," said the fiancé's father. "No. I want to say something first." He looked at me. His eyes were red. "Sir, my wife and I have been to your church. We didn't know it was your church. We've been every single year on the anniversary of that fire. We go to the firefighters' memorial on Asylum Avenue, and we put down flowers and we say a prayer for you, whoever you are. We have a picture of you on our refrigerator. We have had a picture of you on our refrigerator for 26 years. Our daughter grew up looking at that picture every morning of her childhood. We told her every single year on her birthday, every single year, that the only reason she had a birthday was because of a man whose name we did not know." The fiancée was shaking her head, fast, her hands pressed flat to her face. "And tonight," the father went on, his voice cracking, "she walked into this man's house, and she made a joke about his face, about the burns on his hand, the burns he got carrying her." He sat down. He put both hands on the table and looked at them. "I don't know what to do with that," he said. "I don't know what to do with that as her father. I'll tell you something I learned a long time ago in the line of work I was in. When something terrible happens in a room, when a building comes down or a child stops breathing or a man you've known for 20 years takes his last breath in your arms, there is always a moment after, a particular kind of moment, where the people in the room have to decide what kind of people they're going to be from that moment on. It's a small moment. It doesn't last long, but it's the moment that decides everything about what comes after. We were in one of those moments now. I could feel it, so I did the only thing I knew how to do, which was the thing I'd learned to do at fires. I made a plan, and I made it out loud, in a calm voice, so the people around me would have something to hold on to. "All right," I said. "Here's what we're going to do." Everybody looked at me. "First, the pot roast is cold. I'm going to put it back in the oven for 10 minutes. When it comes out, we're going to eat it. Because fruit gets cold and grief doesn't get less, and you might as well eat." The fiancé's mother let out a small, startled laugh through her tears. "Second, after dinner, my son and I are going to take a walk down to the lake. Just him and me. The two of you," I looked at the fiancé's parents, "are welcome to stay. I have 2 guest rooms made up. The drive back is 2 hours, and you're in no shape for it tonight." "We couldn't. You will." "The sheets are clean. And me?" the fiancée said. Her voice was very small. I looked at her for a long moment. I tried to see her, really see her, past the wristwatch and the haircut and the laugh she'd thrown at me in my foyer. I tried to see the little girl in the photograph. I couldn't quite do it, but I could see for the first time that she was a person who had just been hit hard, and that she was trying to stay upright, and that whatever was going to happen next in her life was going to depend almost entirely on what she did in the next 48 hours. "You," I said, "are going to sit at my table and eat your dinner. You're going to do that because your parents are here, and they have had a hard night. Then, tomorrow morning, you and I are going to sit on that porch and have a cup of coffee. Just the two of us. And you're going to tell me how you got to be the way you are. Not as an excuse, as a beginning." She nodded. She nodded a lot of times in a row, like she didn't trust herself to speak. "And the wedding?" she finally said. I shook my head. "There isn't going to be a wedding, not the one you were planning. Not in 3 months. You and my son have things you need to figure out before any of that. You don't have to figure them out tonight. But you do have to figure them out." My son looked at me. I waited for the disappointment. I waited for him to argue. He didn't. He just nodded once. Slow. The same way I'd seen his mother nod 1,000 times when she finally agreed with something she'd been resisting. I put the pot roast back in the oven. We sat down. We ate. Nobody had much to say. The fiancé's mother kept looking at me, and once she reached across the table and put her hand over mine, the scarred one, and she didn't say anything. She just left her hand there for a long time. I thought about my wife. I thought about how she would have handled this, and I realized she would not have been gentler than I was. She would have been firmer. My wife had no patience for cruelty dressed up as humor. She used to say that the way a person treats someone they think is beneath them is the only character trait that matters, because everything else is performance. I kept thinking about what she'd said about character being revealed in those moments. And I knew, because I had been married to her for 41 years and I knew how she thought, that she would have told me one more thing if she'd been at the table. She would have told me to give the girl a chance to become a different person. Because she would have said, "You of all people know what it's like to walk out of a fire alive when you should have died in it. You owe that girl the same chance you got. Not the wedding, not the money, not the house, the chance." After dinner, my son and I walked down to the lake. We didn't talk for the first 10 minutes. We just walked. When we got to the dock, he sat down on the edge of it. I sat next to him. The water was very still. There was a loon out somewhere across the lake, making the sound a loon makes at night, which is the loneliest sound on earth, and also, somehow, the most peaceful. "Dad," he said, "how did I not know?" "Know what?" "That you'd been a firefighter." "I mean, I knew you were a firefighter. But I didn't. I treated it like you were a postman, like it was just a job. I never asked you about it, not really. You were a kid. Kids don't ask." "I'm 33. "Yeah," I said. "Well," he was quiet for a while. The loon called again. "Dad, I'm sorry about tonight. Dad, I'm sorry about tonight. About the house. About God. I let her say those things to you, and I just sat there." "You did. I don't know why I did that." "You know why." He didn't answer that. "You loved her," I said. "Or you thought you did. And when you love somebody, or you think you do, you let them say things you wouldn't let anybody else say. That's how it works. That's how it's. I've thought a lot about that night since it happened. And what keeps coming back to me isn't the photograph, or the tears, or even the moment my son's fiancée realized who I was. What keeps coming back to me is the polishing of the table that morning, because that's where the whole thing started, and that's where everything I want to say about it begins. I've come to believe that the way a man prepares for people who have not yet arrived tells you everything about who he is. I polished that table because my wife taught me to. I cooked that pot roast because she taught me to. I set 5 places because I'd been raised to believe that hospitality is a kind of honesty. You put yourself in front of people the way you actually are, and you let them decide what to do with it. That's the moral inheritance I got from her, and from her father before her, and from my own people before that. Nobody handed it to me on a stone tablet. They handed it to me by living it in front of me, until I couldn't help but pick it up. What my son's fiancée did at the door wasn't an accident. It was the harvest of a long planting. Somewhere along the way, somebody had failed to teach her that the smallest test of a person's character is how they speak to a stranger they think can't hurt them back. And here's the part I keep thinking about: the cause and the effect. She walked into my house believing she was the most powerful person in the room. She walked out of it knowing she was the smallest. That wasn't punishment. That was just what happens when a person mistakes cruelty for confidence. The world rights itself sooner or later. It always does. I've also been thinking about Beckett, my son. He sat at that table and didn't speak when he should have, and that silence cost him more than he yet understands. Loving someone is not the same as protecting them from the truth about themselves. The kindest thing he can do for that young woman now is hold her to a higher standard than she's ever been held to before. If he can do that, and if she can rise to it, they might have something. If he can't, or if she won't, then he'll have learned the most expensive lesson a young man can learn. But he'll have learned it before the wedding instead of after, and that is no small mercy. And me. What I learned, again, at 63, is that grit is not the loud thing people think it is. Grit is washing the dishes the next morning. Grit is making breakfast for the woman who insulted you. Grit is leaving a door open for a person to become someone better, while making absolutely sure they cannot walk through that door and rob you blind. Wisdom and toughness are the same muscle, used at different moments. I'm still learning how to tell which moment is which. I suspect I will be learning that until the day they bury me next to my wife.